When a beloved comic makes the leap from page to screen, the first question we fans often ask is if it will manage to stay faithful to the source. It's a fair concern, after all, because comics come with decades of lore, carefully crafted characters, and storylines that have defined entire generations of readers. But the ironic thing is that sometimes the best TV adaptations are the ones that break the rules. Instead of copying every panel, these shows take creative detours by remixing plots, reinventing characters, or even scrapping whole story arcs. At first glance, that might sound like sacrilege, and let's be honest, some uptight purists tend to bristle at any deviation, as they're convinced that even the smallest change will dilute what made the comic special in the first place. But time and again, history has proven quite the opposite, because as it turns out, bold choices can actually elevate an adaptation beyond its ink and paper origins. The truth is, comics and television are built differently. What works in a serialized monthly issue doesn't always land the same way on screen. A story that unfolds over years might need trimming, a hero's personality might require sharpening, or a side character could be expanded into a fan favorite. And while those shifts sometimes trigger quite an outrage, they can also breathe new life into familiar worlds, attracting both die-hard fans and newcomers who have never flipped through a single comic page. That's where the magic lies, ranging in the balance between respect for the source and the willingness to reinvent it. When done right, straying from the blueprint doesn't just work, it creates something unforgettable, something that resonates beyond the comic shop. Having said that, let's take a gander at 8 such times that television adaptations ditched the expected path, embraced the unexpected, and came out stronger for it. The Boys, 2019 to present. On paper, The Boys was already infamous for being a brutally violent, shock-driven comic that gleefully skewered superhero culture. But when the story hit television, the showrunners made some bold choices by not just adapting the comics, but reimagining them. And maybe that's exactly why it paid off. For starters, the TV series stripped away much of the juvenile shock humor and replaced it with sharper satire. That shift of tone and theme didn't dilute the dark edge, but instead sharpened it. But at its very core, The Boys is a story about ordinary people trying to hold gods accountable. The show follows Huey Campbell, whose girlfriend is brutally killed in a superhero accident, and Billy Butcher, a grizzled anti-hero hell-bent on exposing the corruption of Supes. Together with their ragtag team, they take on the Seven, a corporate-backed superhero group led by the terrifyingly charismatic Homelander. It's part revenge story, part political satire, and part pitch-black comedy about power and corruption. The comics leaned heavily on shock value, over-the-top violence, gratuitous gore, and crude punchlines, which sometimes comes at the expense of nuance. The show dials that back just enough to focus on sharp social commentary. For instance, the series satirizes modern celebrity culture, religious fanaticism, corporate greed, and political propaganda in ways that the comics only brushed against. Vought International, the corporation behind the Supes, almost feels like a mix of a Hollywood studio and a tech giant, making the world strangely reflective of our own. In fact, the character arcs also got a major overhaul. Huey, for instance, is no longer just a stand-in for the everyman, as he grows into a far more layered protagonist than his comic counterpart. He's modeled after Simon Pegg, who inspired his look in the comics, and becomes a more relatable everyman with his own moral compass. Billy Butcher, too, goes from being a one-note sadist to a morally gray anti-hero whose personal struggles carry emotional weight. In the comics, Billy Butcher is far darker, ultimately responsible for his wife's death, but the show flips this by keeping Becca alive and making her a key focus to the conflict. That change not only humanized Butcher, but also gave the show deeper emotional stakes. Moreover, on TV, Carl Urban gives him depth by balancing his rage with a sense of vulnerability, which makes Butcher a little more than just a sadistic manipulator. And then there is the infamous Homelander, who is unarguably the show's crown jewel. Homelander undergoes the most radical upgrade because instead of being just another depraved parody of Superman, he becomes one of television's most terrifying villains who is as human as he is monstrous. While the comics painted him as just another depraved villain, the series turned him into this complex, charismatic, and insecure man who is both terrifying and oddly relatable. But perhaps the biggest win was how the show handled the Seven. Instead of simply parodying superheroes, the series framed them as products of a corporate machine, complete with PR spin, marketing, and social media clout. This angle not only made the satire fresher, but also more relatable to modern audiences. Now, one major omission from the comics is Herogasm, but in the source material, it was a crude parody orgy arc as compared to the show, which was retooled into a more controlled but still shocking episode that added tension without derailing the whole story. Another significant change is how in the comics, Butcher eventually becomes just as bad as the soups he hates, but the show decides to keep his moral struggle ongoing in order to leave room for more complex storytelling. By refusing to follow the comics panel for panel, The Boys didn't just survive the adaptation curse, but rather it thrived in delivering a series that feels timely, provocative, and wildly addictive.
I knew you would return.
The dreaming must be restored.
You want me?
The Sandman TV series 2022 to 2025. Neil Gaiman's The Sandman was considered to be unadaptable for a very long time, and maybe that's exactly why it was one of the most expensive shows ever made. Its sprawling mythology, surreal visuals, and philosophical themes seemed impossible to capture on screen. But Netflix's The Sandman proved otherwise by reimagining the beloved story for a TV show while making significant changes that actually strengthened the adaptation. The series centers around Dream, also known as Morpheus, who is the king of dreams. He is one of the most powerful Endless among his 7 other siblings, who are all immortal beings embodying the fundamental aspects of existence. When a group of occultists capture him in 1916, Dream is imprisoned for over a century, but after escaping, he begins to restore his crumbling realm and reclaim his lost tools of power. Along the way, he faces demons, gods, nightmares, and humans caught in the web of dreams. At its heart, the story is really about change and evolution, through which we see how eternal beings are not immune to growth and loss. I think one of the show's smartest choices was modernizing the timeline. Instead of Dream being imprisoned for decades and released in the late 20th century, as happens in the comics, the series extends his captivity to 2021. This allowed the story to feel contemporary, with characters, settings, and themes reflecting today's world. Another major shift was in casting and character design, because for the show, Death, Lucifer, Joanna Constantine, Lucian, and Desire were all reimagined with diverse actors and gender swaps. These changes initially sparked a raging debate among purists, but they gave the adaptation a fresh energy while staying true to the spirit of Gaiman's universe. The show also tightened the narrative. While the comics often meandered through long arcs and side stories, the series streamlined them by merging some plots and characters. For example, Joanna Constantine replaces John Constantine in key storylines, thus sidestepping licensing issues while also creating a memorable new take. Plus, Neil Gaiman was heavily involved in production in order to ensure that the Netflix adaptation kept the soul of the original. Tom Sturridge, who plays Dream, reportedly auditioned multiple times over months before Gaiman himself approved him, and that's exactly why the first season became one of Netflix's most watched fantasy shows, leading to a quick renewal for the show's final season, which saw Dream give up on his life just so his kingdom and everyone dependent on the dreaming could survive. Overall, by refusing to cling too tightly to the comics, The Sandman found its own identity on screen. It honored the essence of Gaiman's vision while updating it for a modern audience who loved the mix of gothic fantasy with a more grounded human drama. Richly atmospheric and beautifully acted, it proved that sometimes ignoring the exact blueprint is the only way to build a show that's timeless.
Do it.
The Walking Dead 2010 to 2022. At its heart, The Walking Dead is really a survival story. It begins with Sheriff Deputy Rick Grimes waking from a coma only to discover the world has collapsed under a zombie apocalypse. As he searches for his family and joins other survivors, the story unfolds into a bleak but riveting exploration of morality, leadership, and the price of survival. Over 11 seasons, it became less about the undead and more about the living, their communities, their conflicts, and the choices they make in a lawless world. While the TV series drew inspiration from Robert Kirkman's comics, it quickly established its own path because here, characters lived or died in entirely different ways. In the comics, Shane dies early, but on TV, he lasts much longer, becoming one of the show's most fascinating antagonists. Carol, on the other hand, was a minor but tragic character in the comics, but is completely reinvented as a hardened, complex survivor who outlives nearly everyone. Lastly, Daryl Dixon does not even exist in the comics, but still went on to become one of the most iconic characters of The Walking Dead. The pacing also diverged as the show often expanded storylines that were shorter in the comics, such as the Governor arc and Negan's reign, thus allowing deeper character development and thematic exploration. Some deaths were also swapped between characters, which even kept comic readers on edge. For instance, Tyrese dies differently on the show, and Andrea's fate is drastically altered. These deviations gave the series freedom to surprise us all while staying rooted in Kirkman's classic themes of loss and resilience. The fun part is that Andrew Lincoln, who plays Rick, and Norman Reedus, who plays Daryl, became so important over time that some storylines were adjusted around their performances. Plus, Frank Darabont, the original showrunner, only directed the first season, but set the tone for the character's cinematic quality. Interestingly, Kirkman admitted he liked how the show remixed his work, seeing it as an alternate universe rather than a strict retelling. The Walking Dead's boldest move was not just ignoring the comics, but building on them by further expanding arcs, reinventing characters, and introducing new dynamics that made the show a cultural phenomenon. Lucifer, 2016 to 2021. At first glance, Lucifer seemed like an odd gamble because this is the first we see a devil who seems like anyone but him. Inspired by Neil Gaiman's version of the character in The Sandman and later expanded in Mike Carey's DC Vertigo comics, the source material was a philosophical, sprawling tale about the devil abandoning hell to explore free will, destiny, and creation itself. However, when the TV series first debuted, it took a wildly different approach, and instead of cosmic wanderings, it gave us a crime procedural with a supernatural twist. Surprisingly, that risky pivot worked, and soon became one of the most talked about shows on Netflix. The show basically follows Lucifer Morningstar, the devil himself, who abandons his throne in hell and sets up shop in Los Angeles by running a nightclub. Bored with immortality and fascinated by humanity, he winds up consulting with the LAPD after witnessing a murder. But what starts as a case of the week detective drama gradually evolves into a deeper story about love, redemption, identity, and family, all while keeping its signature mix of humor, charm, and celestial politics. The differences from the comics are striking because in Carey's books, Lucifer is a stoic, almost aloof character who is driven by philosophical debates and epic battles across heaven and hell. But on TV, Tom Ellis plays him with a roguish charisma and wit, thus making him seem like more of a debonair antihero than a cold deity. The comics lean heavily into cosmic myth-making fiasco, but the show embraces romance, character-driven drama, and even comedy. Instead of abstract theological debates, audiences got sizzling chemistry between Lucifer and Detective Chloe Decker, which was a relationship that became the heart of the series till the very end. Not just that, we also saw the devil going to therapy and eventually befriending his therapist Linda, which is another cool storyline. Other liberties included entirely new characters like Mazikeen being reimagined with more depth as she went on to become a bounty hunter after starting a long-term relationship with the biblical Eve. Lucifer's brother brother Amenadil was also created for the show, along with the celestial family dynamics front and center. The procedural framework, which was fully non-existent in the comics, gave all the mainstream fans an easy entry point, while later seasons layered in more mythological elements, bridging the gap between detective drama and supernatural epic. In fact, this was such a loved show that even though Lucifer was originally canceled by Fox after 3 seasons, fans ran campaigns under #SaveLucifer and convinced Netflix to pick it up, thus extending its run to 6 seasons. Tom Ellis's performance became so iconic that the character even crossed over into the Arrowverse's Crisis on Infinite Earths. While those purists may have balked at how far Lucifer strayed from its comic origins, the series carved out its own identity. By transforming a dense metaphysical comic into a witty, romantic, and heartfelt drama, it not only won us over, but also kept the spirit of reinvention alive. Arrow, 2012 to 2020. When Arrow first debuted in 2012, very few expected it to launch an entire shared universe of superhero shows. Inspired by DC Comics' Green Arrow, the series reimagined Oliver Queen's story for a darker television audience. Instead of directly translating the comics on screen, the show merged superhero action with gritty drama, thus setting the stage for what would eventually become known as the Arrowverse. The show begins with billionaire playboy Oliver Queen returning to Starling City after being stranded for 5 years on a mysterious island. Naturally traumatized and changed, he adopts the hooded persona of the Arrow in order to hunt corrupt elites and criminals. Over 8 seasons, we see how Oliver evolves from a lone vigilante into a leader, family man, and eventually a hero who sacrifices himself to save the multiverse. But this iconic series didn't follow the comics closely. In fact, it made some of its most successful choices by departing from them. Oliver's origin was reshaped to emphasize trauma and redemption rather than swashbuckling adventure. His rogues gallery was expanded to include foes more associated with Batman, like Ra's al Ghul and Deathstroke, so as to give the show a darker edge. I think the show's biggest deviation was Felicity Smoke, who originally was a minor Firestorm character in the comics, but as her story progressed, she became Oliver's tech expert, love interest, and the overall emotional anchor of the series. Laura Lance's Black Canary arc was also significantly altered, with multiple canaries introduced instead of sticking to one. The show also leaned heavily on serialized storytelling by building a layered narrative with flashbacks and later flash forwards that the comics never even touched base on. While Green Arrow on the page often leaned into political themes, Arrow focused more on personal responsibility, redemption, and even found his family. In the TV show, Stephen Amell performed many of his own stunts, including the famous salmon ladder workout, which became a viral sensation. Ultimately, Arrow's success directly paved the way for more shows like The Flash, Legends of Tomorrow, Supergirl, and Batwoman, thus cementing the Arrowverse as a cornerstone of DC's TV legacy. By ignoring strict comic accuracy, Arrow carved out its own identity. It was not what the Green Arrow fans knew from the comics, but instead a compelling reimagining that struck a balance between street-level grit and superhero spectacle. Its bold departures didn't alienate audiences, but built a whole other universe instead. Gotham, 2014 to 2019. When Gotham first aired, it was marketed as a Batman prequel, but not the one comic fans expected. Instead of focusing on Bruce Wayne's immediate transformation into the Dark Knight, the series centered on a young detective, James Gordon, navigating a city already spiraling into corruption, crime, and chaos. Across 5 seasons, it became less about a single origin story and more about Gotham itself, because, after all, it's the ultimate breeding ground for both heroes and villains. The show begins with the murder of Thomas and Martha Wayne, leaving young Bruce traumatized. While that mirrors the comics, the narrative shifts the spotlight to Gordon, who is portrayed as an idealistic cop trying to uphold justice in a city where the police, politicians, and mobsters are all compromised. As Bruce slowly matures into his identity, we watch Gotham's criminal underworld take shape, with early versions of Penguin, Riddler, Catwoman, and even the whole Joker story emerging in rather unexpected ways. But I think where Gotham diverged most from the comics was in its willingness to remix timelines and character arcs. Villains who traditionally debuted after Batman appeared, like Penguin and Riddler, rose to prominence years before Bruce dons the cape in the show. The Joker storyline, too, was radically reimagined, with Jerome and Jeremiah Valeska serving as proto-Joker characters rather than one definitive origin. Characters like Fish Mooney were created solely for the show, further adding new dynamics to Gotham's crime families. Even Bruce's training was accelerated compared to the comics, thus making his vigilante evolution more hands-on. In Gotham, Robin Lord Taylor's Penguin became a breakout star, stealing scenes with his nuanced performance that earned critical praise. The series was also not afraid to push comic book camp into operatic drama by blending noir grit with pulpy exaggeration. David Mazouz, who played young Bruce, was only 12 when the show started, which really allowed viewers to watch him grow up on screen. By the finale, he dons a proto-Batman suit, thus closing the circle. Although it has been often criticized for its tonal shifts and the liberties it took with its continuity, Gotham thrived by embracing its identity as a comic book soap opera. Its wild storytelling, over-the-top villains, and alternate timeline approach gave fans something fresh instead of predictable. By ignoring strict adherence to Batman's comic canon, the show carved its own story, one that celebrated Gotham City as much as the hero destined to save it. In doing so, it won over fans who really wanted to see the city before the cow. Riverdale, 2017 to 2023. When Riverdale premiered, many of us expected it to be a lighthearted teen series in the vein of the wholesome Archie comics that inspired it. Instead, the show shocked us all by plunging Archie, Betty, Veronica, and Jughead into a dark, noir-inspired murder mystery. Over 7 seasons, it transformed into one of the wildest genre-bending teen dramas on television by giving us 1 part thriller, 1 part soap opera, and 1 part supernatural fever dream. The plot begins with the murder of Jason Blossom, shattering the small town's facade of innocence. As the show progresses, Archie struggles with music and romance, Betty grapples with family secrets, Veronica navigates life as the daughter of a wealthy criminal, and Jughead narrates their descent into Riverdale's hidden darkness. What could have been a simple teen drama instead evolved into a sprawling saga involving cults, serial killers, mob wars, alternate dimensions, and even superpowers. This radical departure from the comics was initially what made the show stand out. The original Archie stories were cheerful slices of Americana, revolving around love triangles, school dances, and milkshakes at Pops. But Riverdale flipped that formula on its head by injecting mystery, sexuality, and high-stakes drama. Every character was reimagined, as Betty's girl-next-door persona hid a darker, obsessive streak, while Veronica became a glamorous femme fatale, and Jughead shifted from a comic relief foodie to the brooding outsider. The show also was not afraid to push boundaries, exploring topics like cult indoctrination, corruption, and identity in ways the comics never touched. The show became infamous for its unpredictable twists, with storylines ranging from musical episodes to time jumps. It also sparked viral internet memes due to its often over-the-top dialogue and wild tonal shifts. Despite mixed critical reception, it developed a passionate fan base and became a cornerstone of teen TV during its run. By rejecting the lighthearted simplicity of its source material, Riverdale reinvented Archie comics for a new generation. It was messy, melodramatic, and sometimes outright bizarre, but that was exactly its charm. Instead of trying to replicate the comic's innocence, the show leaned into unpredictability, creating a campy, addictive series that thrived on its sheer audacity.
Get down!
iZombie, 2015 to 2019. So on paper, iZombie had one of the strangest premises in DC Vertigo's library. The original comic by Chris Roberson and Michael Allred followed Gwen Dillon, a gravedigger zombie who had to eat brains once a month to keep her humanity. Alongside a ghost best friend and a were-terrier, she basically solved supernatural mysteries while navigating a quirky, monster-filled Portland. However, the TV adaptation of this took a completely different approach, and surprisingly enough, it worked brilliantly. The show followed Olivia Liv Moore, a promising medical resident whose entire life is upended when she's turned into a zombie at a boat party gone wrong. To hide her condition and satisfy her need for brains, she takes a job at the morgue, where she discovers that consuming brains gives her the memories and personality traits of the deceased. This unique power allows her to assist Detective Clive Babineau in solving murders while also grappling with her undead identity. Unlike the comic's sprawling supernatural mythology, the TV version leaned heavily into crime procedural territory. Gone were the ghosts, mummies, and were-creatures. Instead, the focus was on detective work, dark humor, and the overarching conspiracy of a zombie outbreak spreading through Seattle. Each week, Liv adopted new quirks from the brains she consumed, anything from a gamer to a kleptomaniac, thus providing both comic relief and emotional range for Rose McIver's performance. Another major change was the tone of the comics were colorful, surreal, and steeped in horror comedy. Compared to that, the series opted for a balance of quirky humor, grounded crime drama, and serialized arcs about corporate corruption, underground crime, and eventually a full-blown societal collapse as Seattle is quarantined. Supporting characters like Ravi, Blaine, and Major became fan favorites, thus adding layers of charm and menace which were all painfully absent from the comics. There were many cool reasons why iZombie just worked. The comics co-creator, Michael Allred, provided the distinctive pop art opening credits for the show. Rose was a highlight, with fans celebrating her range. Interestingly, the network originally pitched the series as a straight drama before showrunners Rob Thomas and Diane Ruggiero Wright pushed for its blend of humor and crime. By stripping away the comic's supernatural ensemble and refocusing on a clever procedural hook, iZombie became one of TV's most inventive genre shows. It embraced camp, heart, and character-driven storytelling, keeping us invested across 5 seasons of a quirky show. So that was our list of the top TV shows that blissfully ignored their comic roots and absolutely ate. Having said that, which other show do you guys think belongs in this list? Let us know about your thoughts and theories in the comment box below.